of Ireland. And today we're looking at 20 new works added to the collection. And the first thing I want to say is that we are indeed fortunate as a collection to have the creativity of 20 such wonderful artists being exhibited here today and contributing to what is a growing legacy of the National Self-Portrait Collection. The collection itself is quite an important part of Ireland's cultural heritage. It started back in 1983 with an initial purchase of 15 self-portraits from the art collector and former chairman of the Limerick Art Society, John Leafsey. And now in the, I guess, almost 30 years since then, the collection has grown to include 450 works, not just by painters, but by sculptors, printmakers, ceramicists, photographers, and mixed media artists. As some of you may know, this year here at the university we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the arrival of the first students onto this campus. And when you consider what's been achieved here at Classy in as little as 40 years, it really is quite a phenomenal development over those 40 years. And I think it would be fair to say that the university has made 40 years of contribution to the cultural and artistic richness of Limerick, the Midwest, and indeed of Ireland. And we couldn't have achieved all of this without our many supporters over the years who have contributed their work, their time, and in many cases their money, to the development of art and culture on this campus. And I want to take this opportunity today of sincerely thanking them on behalf of the Board of Trustees and on behalf of the University of Limerick. We recently had a photographic exhibition in here called Face Value, which was celebrating 40 years of the UL community. And the exhibition consisted of 40 photographic portraits depicting university community members past and present, 40 years of people at UL. And one of the things that struck me about the exhibition was the degree of enthusiasm that it engendered among the staff members and the students of the university, and the support shown by the campus community for that project really illustrates the interest that is here on this campus in creativity and in artistic endeavour. And a couple of weeks ago we had an open weekend celebrating the launch of UL 40, which is what we're calling the 40th anniversary celebrations. And hundreds of people from the local community came and visited the campus and got a taste of what the university has to offer in terms of its cultural and physical amenities. And I just want to state quite clearly that the University of Limerick is an open campus. There are no gates in this university, and we will continue to open our doors to visitors locally, nationally and internationally, and invite them and hope that they take up the invitation to come to UL to see and experience the self-portrait collection and also the other art collections that we have available here. And recently we produced a wonderful information map entitled the UL Art Trail, which provides a map of the campus highlighting the art and cultural aspects. And in addition, we have a flora and fauna trail which focuses on the biodiversity of our surroundings. And this is an attempt by us to attract people to come to the campus to share in the riches that are available here. And this is probably a good time for me to thank somebody without whom neither of those guides would have been produced. This exhibition wouldn't be taking place, and that person is Yvonne Davis, who puts a tremendous amount of work into nurturing the arts in this university, and as president I want to thank her. Cultural development is also something we try to make integral to much of our teaching, learning and research here, and we are also very conscious of our role in contributing to the cultural life of Limerick City. And so we're delighted that Limerick has been chosen as the first National City of Culture in 2014, and the University is committed to playing a full and active part in the activities that will take place in 2014. Before I finish, I'd like to take this opportunity of formally thanking Maurice and Maura Foley, who have very generously donated the Hilda Van Stockham and Packie Smith portraits, which you will see on the walls here and are wonderful additions to the self-portrait collection. And lastly, can I just say that it is indeed a great privilege to have so many of the artists here today to share their reflections on their work. I really want to thank them for coming. The most interesting part of this day, apart from the President's speech, is to hear from the artists themselves about what motivated them in coming up with the wonderful works that we see all around us. And so without further ado, I'll hand back to Yvonne, who will introduce the collection and the artists. And thank you again for coming and being with us today.
Thank you very much. To start with, we have Hilda Van Stockham, as Donna said, was a gift of Maurice and Marie Foley. So unfortunately, Hilda is deceased, but we do have somebody who is part of the Bourne Vincent Gallery Committee and who's also the University of Limerick Arts Officer, and she actually knew Hilda personally. So Patricia Moriarty, please.
I met Hilda when she was very elderly. She was probably about 83 when I met her. But she still had a glint in her eye which gave you a sense of what she was like when she was a young woman. It must have been very exciting to study in the Metropolitan School of Art at that time, and at that very tender age of 16. While she dabbled with a lot of the movements in art that were happening at that time, she returned to probably the artistic tradition of her own country, which was Dutch still life painting. And in this painting, I think you can see a nod to it. It's a bit of a joke because she has contemporary Dutch painting here, but it's very much in the form of a still life. And in fact, she doesn't even call it a self-portrait, it's called Oval Mirror. And I think what you can see in it is that Hilda was very much a studio-based artist. She said in an interview with Brian Fallon that she loved what is. So that was her big thing. She wanted to paint things, she painted people, but really she wanted to study light and how it brought objects to life in front of us. When I met her, she was having a career retrospective in the RHA, and her husband was with her, Spike Marlin. And Spike, you didn't get Hilda without Spike. Spike was about 90 at that stage. He was a very charming Canadian gentleman who used to tell me that he was a spy for the Canadian government in Ireland during the Second World War. But Spike sourced all of Hilda's frames, which were very much an important part of her work as well. But I remember one day in the gallery, he pointed over to her. Now he's 90 and she's 83. And he said to me, Hilda, I have loved her from the moment that I met her. And to me, she is as beautiful now as she was when I met her at the age of 17 at the art ball in Trinity College. It was a fancy dress ball, and she had dressed up and she actually painted herself. So I just, as part of, self-portraits, document artists through their lives. This is Hilda Van Stockham, and she was 17 at the art ball in Trinity. And I think it really shows that throughout life, artists use self-portraits to document their lives, the passing of their lives, and how they grow, not only as artists and as people. They were two lovely people, and I was very, very privileged to know them. So, thanks.
Hello. When Yvonne emailed me, I was working in Missouri at the time, and it was a great honour to be invited to participate in this collection because I'm from Limerick, and so thank you. And I don't really know what to say about the work because it's really internal and it's not overtly a self-portrait, but I think that all the work is a self-portrait. The work is based on my sketchbooks, and there's a combination of text and imagery. My larger work really feeds into this as well, and that's quite large: water and fire and rituals. Other than that, thank you.
The RHA, the Ashford Gallery, and myself and Mark St. John Ellis, went to visit his studio in Balbriggan. Now, I hadn't seen his work before, but it was extraordinary. His paintings are on a large scale, beautifully textured, alive with figures, military vehicles, travelling over the landscapes and so on. And since then, I mean, he had a terrific show in the Ashford the following year, so I've been very impressed with his paintings ever since. His, the piece he has here is called Young, Self, Fast, Slow. And that's the piece on the ground over there on the red carpet. He describes it, it's an oil painting on wheels, kids' bike stabilisers, which is positioned on a small old red rug. It's a painting which went through many different stages and disguises before it became a portrait, and part of an installation of 30 plus such paintings on wheels called Stable, and that was in the Hillsborough, in the Highlands Municipal Gallery in Drogheda last year. And he goes on to say, there was one painting which stood out for me because it had taken on so many layers of paint over a period of about 3 years of working and reworking. The paint became so thick that I covered parts of it in paint remover, and after scraping some of the paint off, which looked much older all of a sudden, the colours all subdued, it seemed to me that it gave an older person a younger face and a younger person an older face. In other words, it's difficult to put a number on it. The person could almost be any age between 10 and 50, and that's what made me decide on this one. Young, self, fast, slow, looks nothing like me, but I strongly sense myself present and past in it. And that's the words of Thomas Bressing.
Statement from Liz. Start with what you see. On the left, the artist performing a painting performance in gold with lit candles in his hat. In the centre, a galaxy made of crosses and stars of David, and on the right, the artist performing in blue. The piece seems to be about the making of images, the image in the centre being made by the act of painting. In both cases, the brushes are out of focus, as though in motion. The title Starry Night over 16 Dufferin Avenue, Dublin, is taken in part from Vincent van Gogh's most recognised image, The Starry Night, connected to the address where I spent most of my childhood and first heard about art and realised that artists could invent their own worlds and make their own starry nights. In thinking about self-portrait, I've always felt that the mind is as important as the physical appearance of the body and the so-called representation of likeness. When I made the I'm Not Blind portraits, 1976, I put the text of what the subjects said next to their image. I said at the time that what thoughts people have of what is in their mind is as much a portrait of them as their image. I read somewhere that Vincent van Gogh had painted Starry Night at night with candles in his hat, and in 1970 I did a photo performance piece based on that concept. The portrait photos here were taken in 1970. At the beginning of 2011, I added the galaxy photo to make up the complete piece. As the galaxy is in blue and gold, I thought the portraits should be influenced by these colours. The portraits are likeness representation of physical appearance, and the galaxy represents the state of mind. Growing up in Dublin, my mother was Catholic and my father was Jewish, Muriel McMahon and Charles Levine. As I didn't know anyone else at all with a similar background, these facts pervaded my mind and life constantly. Of course, they were different times. Nevertheless, for me, this is an emotionally charged work, which I think adds to its strength. In making this work, representing the mind as much as the body is of equal importance. All art has the capability to be uplifting. As the body is gravity bound to the earth, it is only the mind that can lift us up to the heavens. But one has to be willing to let go of presupposed positions, as positions held also have gravity and keep us in the same place. In putting these two symbols together, I was initially representing a condition of mind. But in the process, something else happened. There is a certain joy in seeing these two symbols together in one galaxy. The joy comes from the truth and beauty of tolerance, as tolerance is the heart essence of all spirituality. Intolerance only produces prejudice, hatred, and lies. In a subtle way, also, there is a connection with the Troubles. 1972, not Catholic and Jewish, but Protestant and Catholic, which was very much a part of my upbringing. When I was a child, there was a popular song my mother used to sing. The words in part were, "The strangers came and tried to teach us their way. They blamed us for being what we are. Sure, they might as well have tried to catch a moonbeam or to light a penny candle from a star." Somehow I think Starry Night over 16 Dufferin Avenue, Dublin, is also about that song. The point seemed to be to represent the state of mind that one grew up in as a way of letting go of secret representation of self as much as image. This is neither bad nor good. It simply reveals more open mind. It's wonderful to be able to find a way to incorporate life's experiences, both good and bad, and turn them into art, and to show the world the true nature of your mind without fear. In 2004, I did the videotape entitled The Self-Express. I said at the time that understanding your mind is what counts now. Even though postmodernism has claimed that self is dissolving, it is impossible to dissolve something that you have not completely recognised or understood. Starry Night over 16 Dufferin Avenue, Dublin, itself has a mysterious, almost ritualistic quality. The lit candles make the viewer think of many rituals where lighted candles are used and artists as mediator, and the galaxy makes the viewer enter the world of their own fantasy and dreaming. I've said in the past that all images are rituals by artists empowering the viewer to be the image. See it, be it, so to speak. Historically, the Renaissance Old Masters always used blue and gold to imply an infinite heavenly devotion, a celestial lift upwards, and perhaps that is the real function of self-portrait. Devotion is to absolute truth, the ultimate fearless compassion. We are not afraid to be blamed for being what we are. The galaxy is not only a representation of mind, it is the landscape of the viewer's art experience, the secret to how the viewer's mind works. The candles simplistically represent light, the thing that makes it easier to see. So if one were to ask what ritual is being performed here, I think the answer could be the ritual is seeing. You are given permission to see more, and maybe in art, and only in art, is it possible to light a penny candle from a star. Thank you.
I'd first like to thank everybody, the board, who invited me to make the painting. And when I got the email, I immediately thought, I don't make self-portraits. I didn't know what to do about that, so I thought about it. And then I also saw that that the gallery was going to buy the painting, and there was going to be no 50% gallery fee. So I thought I'd better think about this a bit more. So I teach at Cork College of Art and Design, and one of my taglines to students is that all artists ever do are make self-portraits. No matter what you do, it's autobiographical. It comes from that self. So I thought, okay, I'll do it. There was a portrait I always admired by Arnold Böcklin, the 19th century German painter. I think German. He has his eyes closed and he's turned to the left, and he looked really cool. And so I thought, oh, I could do that. So I put on a suit, because he was wearing a suit, and I took lots of photographs of myself. And so I thought, okay, here we go, we'll do this. So I went into the studio, and then of course the actual materials never do what you want them to do. So this sort of very, very small image appeared, the one on the left, and I showed it to my kids. I've never actually painted any of my kids, so it was very strange making a portrait, because all my work is about absence. It's really about the person not being there. So I showed it to my kids, and they said to me, "They look like photographs years ago, Dad, when you were young." And so I realised it was a very old self-portrait. It had nothing to do with the photographs I'd taken or Arnold Böcklin. And then lying around were these projectors, the drawing I'd done of projectors. And so they'd said it was an old painting of me, so I thought, well, it was me when I was leaving Cork. I'd been at the Cork College of Art as a student and left because I couldn't get a grant here. And it was Maggie Thatcher was just coming to power, but my dad got me a full grant in England, and that was full grant, it wasn't a student loan. It was just such a wonderful experience. So I went over. So basically, I think that's sort of me sort of kind of stepping onto the boat, waiting for the cameras to roll. I'm not sure they ever did, but there's one here today. And it reads 8mm stereoscopic view. My mum always took 8mm Kodak films, so it was that clicking, that sound of the clicks, indeed. That I think I was playing with that sound. So anyway, thank you very much. That's how the painting came to be.
Well, the first thing I have to say that making a self-portrait was probably the most difficult things I've ever had to do, apart from filling in my tax return this year. Anyone who's familiar with my work will know that I rarely include human figures in my work, let alone myself. So when the email came in for me, well, for the commission to do a self-portrait, I actually thought somebody was having a joke or taking the mick or something. So it took me a while actually to kind of think about what I might do. I suppose as Simon said that most artists' work would be autobiographical by some nature, even though self-representation doesn't become a part of it. And I think that's very much the case for my own work, but when having to make something that presents yourself in real terms is a really difficult thing to do, but I thought I'd have a go at it anyway. And it took me a while, and it was only after giving a talk in the Crawford College of Art whereby I included a slide of one of my favourite writers, a Russian called Isaac Babel. And the slide that I showed was a portrait of him taken by the Russian secret police just before his execution in 1938, I think it was. I thought, that's a way to go. I'll do the side profile, basically because as I started drawing myself more and more, I started to realise how closely I was resembling my dad, and I didn't want myself looking back at me while I was making it. So that's the reason for the side portrait. I added my name in Russian just to follow, got the inspiration from the Isaac Babel portrait, and the number is my PPS number. It just seems that you have to put it to everything these days. Thank you.
Okay, I've never spoken about my work in public before, so I've just a slight head cold. I would like to thank the members of the board for inviting me to paint my self-portrait. It's something I may never have done otherwise. Portraiture is not something I've ever given much thought to in the past, as I'm mainly a landscape painter. Years ago I painted portraits of my parents and a few of my close friends. Recently I got a request to do a portrait of a lady out of the blue, and then shortly after that I got this invitation to paint my own self-portrait. So it just happened that one was a continuation of the other. I really enjoyed the experience of painting my self-portrait. It allowed me to be self-reflective, and I would like to do more in the future. So.
Hi everyone. I'm going to keep this very short. I'm terrible at public speaking. When I was first asked to do the portrait, I was very flattered, and then I had a look at the collection just to get some ideas. And there was a lot of great work, but what I especially noticed was the work that was kind of non-traditional. I thought there were some really clever pieces, like there was a DNA portrait, or another one, someone doing like a hostage photo, holding like a newspaper. And I thought, great, I should do something really clever as well. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised that there's actually nothing wrong doing a really straightforward portrait. And I think there's great value in that. I think the face is the most interesting subject for me to look at, and also to do. This one, of course, is very different because it's for a public collection. So it's not just how you see yourself, but how you want others to see you. So I struggled a little bit with that. But yeah, that's what I did.
I'm not going to say very much about Martin Turner because although I think I nominated him for selection or for inclusion in this collection, I wasn't expecting to have to talk about him when I came down to Limerick yesterday evening. So I don't have a nice biographical piece written about him. I haven't had a conversation with him about this particular portrait, and I didn't see the portrait until I came in here at about 5 to 12 today. But there are a couple of things I think it is important to say. A little bit of background. Martin Turner's English, but he came to Ireland. I think he actually came as a student to study geography or economics, not at all to work as an artist or as a cartoonist. He's worked for the Irish Times since the 1970s, and he's lived in this country during all of that time. Dennis Kennedy, who was the northern editor of the Irish Times, and who I think might be the person who first suggested that he should do some work for the Irish Times, said of him in an interview about a year ago when there was a feature article about Martin Turner in the Irish Times. Dennis Kennedy said he adds greatly to the individuality of the paper. He should upset half the people, as well as amusing half the people, and he does that. And that's what the Irish Times wanted of him. Martin Turner himself said in the same interview, or in the same article with Cathy Sheridan in the Irish Times, he said, I'm not trying to get people to fall over laughing. We think of cartoons as having to be funny, but actually political cartoons are very serious. It's just that comedy is their way of biting hardest at the political issue they want to draw attention to. So he says, I'm not trying to get people to fall over laughing, but I am trying to get them to look at something in a different way. And so I think he too was surprised to be asked to contribute a self-portrait to a national collection, to what is actually generally a fine art collection, although I know we're all tossing the term fine art around and it's being challenged and pulled and expanded, especially in the last couple of years. But it seemed to us that it was important that this collection should include the work of a very dedicated cartoonist who's given an awful lot to Irish life over the years. And I suppose the final thing I'd just say about it is that when you're painting anything or making an artwork in any medium, you can sort of opt to be comic or tragic. You can opt to be self-expressive or to be something a little bit more maybe intellectual in your approach or cerebral. And the English critic Christopher Ricks, writing about Shakespeare, called attention to how relatively easy it is to produce tragedy because you're playing with emotions and they're very powerful things. I mean, I'm not saying that it's easy to produce good tragedy, but it's easy to make work that is tragic and that is quite effective. But to produce really good comedy, you have to be extremely intelligent. And it seems to me that's what Martin Turner's cartoons have unfailingly been, and this one is no exception. You can look at it for yourselves. Okay, thank you.
In 1985, I began my art education and training at Dún Laoghaire School of Art. Beyond life drawing and the studio projects, the theme of self was an accessible subject to work with. And in visual culture studies and history of art, one had to pick a subject for a kind of mini thesis project. I found a dictionary of artists in the library, but instead of illustrations of their work, each artist was represented by their self-portrait, thumbnail in size and black and white. I researched my artists and found colour reproductions of their self-portraits in other volumes and visits to the National Gallery. And I was heartened to realise Rembrandt could look himself in the eye and question who he was. I had been using a viewfinder camera with no light meter and guessed the exposure and compensated in the darkroom. I acquired a Nikon FG single reflex camera thereafter, which I would continue to take over 40,000 photographs in the following 25 years. But in 1986, the following year from whence I'd begun my art education, I attended the National Gallery in London to a self-portrait photography exhibition called Staging the Self. I saw how the camera might serve my inquiries. I saw Max Ernst, Edvard Munch, Cindy Sherman, Susan Hiller, Lee Freelander, and 1860s auto-portraits by early photographers standing over Niagara Falls. I was captivated and saw how you could use art in any medium to resolve something of ourselves in the world. As I progressed and matured, I left self behind in lieu of a more outward way of looking at the world. And eventually my paintings became less narrative and unpeopled. But my early observations of self allowed me to explore confidently the possibilities. I continued to document artists at work as part of my process and made this painting Summer Night recently from that process. I camp, I drive to the edges of places in pursuit of my subject now, looking for something against that horizon, that daybreak, that twilight. I'm delighted to be able to contribute this painting to the National Self-Portrait Collection. I think it presents something of my pursuit as an artist, off stage if you like, an acknowledgement of self in the activity of looking. And I'm honoured to have been invited to contribute a work to the National Self-Portrait Collection here at the University of Limerick. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. I share my fellow trustee note of speaking to work. Packy would be much better. He's a much taller, much more dynamic. As you can see, much better looking person. Packy is a very multi-talented person, and I just wanted to share one idea about him, because it's great to have this work here. And actually, today is just wonderful from the point of view of a trustee to have these like really solid, fantastic bunch of work to be added. The collection is really getting enriched every year, and it's a great process. But it's great to have Packy's work, because Packy has two small drawings, maybe three small drawings in the National Drawing Collection in the Limerick City Gallery of Art. And he came with Ronan Halpin to Limerick in 1991, and he stayed for quite a while, I think, with Sheila Deegan, the city arts officer. And they constructed this amazing thing. It was like their first ever time making this massive big sculpture, but they made this figure, the Wounded King, about maybe 25, 30 feet high, and they somehow managed to get it into the People's Park, probably sideways, and they erected it. And it was just a stunning kind of like, I suppose, surreal sort of mythological figure. And then it was wounded, and again, and there was this lovely process of kind of like engaging with the young fellas that were engaged in messing with this figure. But it was a process, and I think part of it probably informed the way he kind of worked for years after, because it was this kind of very intense engagement with making the sculpture. So it's lovely to I suppose many people would remember the experience of seeing the Wounded King as it kind of trailed around the country after. And so it's kind of great to have this portrait back in the place, because as a portrait in itself, it's just really vibrant. It's a lovely, lovely piece. It's kind of like a barrel top, painted on wood, and it's sort of I kind of summarise in a way he's sort of inner vision, where there's like these characters that are floating around his head, and it's just a very, very, very vibrant piece, and it's a great addition to the collection. Thank you.
Hello. I suppose first of all I just want to thank the National Self-Portrait Collection for having me as part of the collection. I've known it for a long time. I've known the collection since I was 11, back in 1983, so you work out how old I am. So I've known it for a long time, and it's a lovely thing now to be part of the collection, especially given that I'm from County Limerick and that I teach in the School of Art and Design here. And I'm so proud of Limerick's collection with the visual arts, and I'm also very pleased that I don't know, do we call it inducted into the collection? I don't know what we call it, but it's particularly nice to be part of this exhibition where there are artists that I've kind of considered, though they may not have realised it, I consider to have been part of my development as a painter. Most people know me as a painter, and I suppose I'm thinking there in particular of Simon, Stephen, Oliver, Keith. Those guys now would really have helped me to feel like I was part of, you know, a community of painters who were trying to do something at a particular stage. And our work has all developed off in different directions, and it's been great to see that progress. The work that I've made is a work of sculpture, which will be a surprise to some people who probably know me as a painter. But in this work too, we have my kind of preoccupation with trying to transform rubbish materials, crap materials, really, from one condition into a condition which seems to be more significant than it really ought to be. I've made the work from paper pulp and glue and soot. Essentially, it's trying to give people an experience of materials that are transformed from one condition into another, and in much the same way, I'm trying to make a conceptual self-portrait too. I don't want to say too much about it. You'll all have an opportunity to project upon me and to psychologize the meaning and significance of the three particular skulls. I'll say not much about that, but just to draw attention to the possibility that my self-portrait might really be a presentation of what my bones will look like once my flesh is done with it. But that's it. Thank you.
I am really honoured to be a part of this collection and to be invited here today. To create a self-portrait is an opportunity to reflect on the concerns that have preoccupied an artist. A self-portrait is an entity that may be ever-changing in the course of a lifetime. It could be said that every work that an artist makes is a form of self-portrait. Each can be read as the product of that person's experience, as their unique response to the world in which they live. It is interesting in this light that the concept of identity became a major issue for female artists in the late 20th century. Archetypes and stereotypes upon which female identity had been predicated were addressed by a number of artists, and the significance of myths and fairy tales in terms of a feminine sense of self became subject to deconstructions and reinterpretation. To some extent, the significance of myths, symbols, and archetypes had already gained currency in the world of psychoanalysis through the investigations of both Freud and Jung. In the course of my own work, I have created a number of series around the symbolism and mythology of the dress, especially the white dress, and its association with rites of passage. For this particular image, the fairy tale of the red shoes had associations with childhood and the liberation afforded an introverted persona through the medium of dance. In my residual memory, the malevolent compulsion to dance enforced by the red shoes of the fairy tale was transformed into a symbol of freedom and the possibility of a complete immersion in an art form which might supersede the mundane reality of life in the west of Ireland. It was a shock to reread this story in adulthood and realise the dire consequences of the vanity associated with the red shoes. The film The Red Shoes took as its theme the notion of a life dedicated solely to the perfection of an art form and the personal sacrifice required to fully achieve artistic potential. The authors of the film, Powell and Pressburger, believed that in the wake of the war in 1948, the world, having spent 4 years dying in the name of freedom and liberty, was ready to see a movie that suggested it was all right to die in the name of art. The symbolic meaning of the red shoes in the fairy tale and film has been adopted by psychoanalyst Dr. Susan Cavalier Adler in her explorations of the creative mystique and how the creative process can be the focus of progressive mourning for self-integration and reparation. This obituary of Maura Shearer, accompanied by the image of her dancing in the red shoes, was something I had to save and archived for a number of years. When revisited and suspended before light, the figures of Kathleen Turner and two other actors performing in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf became vaguely apparent in the background. These seemed symbolic of the shadow figures that make up the archetypes of myths and fairy tales. Although this image may seem like a digital composite, it's actually very manual. The other image, which transforms the image of Shearer dancing in the red shoes into an image of a ball gown, was a transparency of a white child's dress, which I have used in a number of artworks and physically placed behind the obituary. In many ways, these juxtapositions and the significance of the red shoes are matters that appear to have more and more significance for the life of the artist. I certainly feel that as a representation of self, this image is something that I strongly identify with in terms of the concerns of my work, but also in terms of the obsessive or compulsive nature that can be associated with the creative drive. The fact that the child's dress forms what would seem a ball gown, a transformative device in another fairy tale, is interesting in the context of the negativity of the red shoe stories. In many ways, it is the mystery of the image and the multiple possible interpretations which make it plausible as a contemporary representation of self.
You'll be glad to know I can't remember much about making this one at all. It was done very early, and I gave it to my parents. When I was asked to do the self-portrait a number of years ago, I wanted to use this one, but I couldn't really extract it from my parents. And I recently inherited it, because my parents are both dead, and so I said I'd like to get it into the collection here if they wanted it. And so I decided that I didn't want money for it, but I wanted once to give it some money to a charity. Now, I'm a disaster for charities because they all, well, not all, a few of them ask for paintings like it's a disease, and mine always don't sell, so I thought this way I might do it. And it's the first time I've got money for a charity, and it went to the 1 in 4, which is one of my favourite ones, and that's really all I know about the little painting, and I hope other people put money into that charity, and I also hope that it's part of the Women's Refuge one, because that's another favourite one. It gives me perverse pleasure to think of families able to escape from some brutal husband going into a refuge where they can be safe again. Anyway, I've done me preaching. Thank you.
I have portrayed myself as a theatrical character of the Harlequin from the Italian Commedia dell'arte, early English pantomime. The self-portrait is painted as if to be an idea for a player in a drama or a cut-out figure for a toy theatre. The world as theatre has always been a central theme of my work, making miniature theatres and making paintings intended to function like theatre scenes. I'm interested in the borderline between what is fake and what is real, the fakeness here of how it's made and depicted, and the reality of the feeling of the character. The Harlequin was originally a comic and mischievous character who could magically change stage settings to different locations. He was normally masked and supposed to be invisible to mortal eyes. In making a self-portrait, that's a way of the normally unseen artist becoming revealed. So the Harlequin, as I have portrayed myself, is removing the mask and becoming visible. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce this work to the collection. Not many people know of Phil Kelly in Ireland, and certainly back then, when I got to know him, he was unknown. His parents emigrated from Ireland in the 50s, and he went to Rugby Public School, where he lasted, I think about 3 years, and was expelled because he was caught drinking on a day off. So that maybe give you a bit of an indication as to how his life kicked off. He was somebody who didn't conform. He eventually qualified, had a qualification in teaching, and he went around the world, painted everywhere he was, ended up in Mexico, loved it, and he came back there in 1982 with, he told me at the time, 50 pounds in his pocket and penniless. But he managed to get a job teaching English, stayed there for a number of years. Unfortunately, when he was away from Mexico, there was an earthquake in 1985, and his first wife was killed in that. He spent some time in Europe and then was drawn back to Mexico subsequently, where he remarried and had a very successful career as an artist there, and showed in all the major galleries, and his work is in the Contemporary Museum of Modern Art in Mexico. His involvement in this side of the world occurred, I suppose, in the UK in 1996, when he had an exhibition in the Westbourne Gallery in London, and by chance, a man that we now know very well, Rick Stein, had won a competition for a cookery book, and he saw Phil's work and loved it, and used the prize money that he got to buy some of his work. He later purchased about 15, over a period of time, purchased 15 works which are in his various restaurants in Padstow, and he subsequently commissioned Phil to do a mural in that seafood restaurant. Now, as somebody who collected his work at the time, I was on a little art trip to St. Ives, and I was driving back up, and I said I must go to Padstow, call in and see the work, not knowing the difficulty of getting a seat in the seafood restaurant in Padstow. I rang the day before I left St. Ives to call in and stay, and the man who answered the phone said, you have no chance of getting in here, 3 months waiting list, I'm very sorry. So I kind of said, I've used my blagging experience. I said, well, a friend of mine is Phil Kelly, would you just maybe mention that to Rick if he's there? So anyway, the man said, hold on a minute. He came back and he said, we actually have a room, sea view, and we have a table for you in the dining room. So myself and my wife had a wonderful meal. I, of course, was looking at the artwork. That was my total focus. And Rick came out of the kitchen, spent 10 minutes talking to us about the work and everything else. And my wife said to me when he went back to the kitchen, you never mentioned anything about the food. All you spoke about was Phil Kelly for the last 20 minutes. And I said, I think he'll understand. And he did. But Rick Stein became a very important supporter of his work in the UK, and he had many successful shows subsequently. In Ireland, his involvement started about 1997, I think, or 1999. He had an exhibition in the Frederick Gallery in Dublin, David Britton's gallery, and every year and every maybe second year, 2000, 2002, 2004, he had exhibitions. They were all sellout shows. He had great support base in Ireland because anybody who visited Mexico, he was the unofficial Irish ambassador, and Seamus Heaney and his wife Maria were great supporters, and he did some cover pieces for their publications in Mexico. So he certainly was somebody who was greatly admired. But one thing that he always wanted, and I suppose we all like to be recognised where we come from, he wanted his work to be known in Ireland. And unfortunately, it was known but not known to the extent that it should have been known. And this opportunity to have his self-portrait in this collection is something that he would be truly delighted about. I know Yvonne has been in touch and spent a whole year organising this piece with his wife Ruth, and she is really, really pleased that this has happened. He led a tough life. He basically didn't spare himself. They say he died from liver failure. People said it was the paint that he worked with, but if Phil was here, he would tell you that it was another liquid that did most of the damage. But certainly opening nights, I remember opening nights, and they were long affairs. He enjoyed himself. If you had the privilege of meeting him before the opening, a few days before, the gallerists didn't really go for that because it was a bit pressurised, but I certainly had spent some great time with him in advance of some of his shows. Another reason why this piece is here is because one of our trustees, Patrick Murphy, introduced actually his work to Ireland. He happened to be visiting Mexico in, I think, 1997, 98. And as an art fanatic, he, of course, I think he was there on business, but he went to the Museum of Contemporary Art and saw a work by Phil Kelly. And when he was being interviewed on the Mike Murphy Art Show, he mentioned that in Ireland. on radio and said he'd never heard of this artist and it was a wonderful piece. And Phil Kelly's mother was listening to the radio in Wales, and the connection was made, and suddenly in Ireland he had the opportunity to exhibit, which he really, really enjoyed. I can tell you that this is a very significant moment. If you look at, for Phil Kelly's work, for Phil Kelly's wife, and for him, if you look at the piece, he had no ego. This is never going to be a complimentary piece. It's strong, it's tough, you know, there's a lot of pain in it, but it's great art, and he'd be very happy. Thanks.
Hi folks. I'd just like to say thank you very much for people inviting me, the Self-Portrait Collection, for inviting me to submit a piece for this year's inclusion in this year's show. It's wonderful to take part in a show where there's so many different types of things. So when people have received an email, they all respond in a different way. And it's quite surprising what people do. I decided to make a drawing rather than a painting. This year I was very busy, but I decided that I was making drawings to be seen on their own. There weren't drawings leading up to a painting in the future. So I decided to make a drawing. I thought it would be more challenging to make a drawing because the way I work, I can't really remove the Conte crayon I use. It's on a gessoed surface, and I can't really get rid of that the way I could with paint. So I had to try to be fairly precise about it. Also working on I hadn't worked on a self-portrait for years, maybe 20 years. So it was a bit of it's something I wouldn't have tried unless I'd been invited to do it. So I think it's been successful and I enjoy doing it. Maybe figures will appear in the future in pieces of work. I don't know. So thank you very much.
Hello. I knew about this collection, and when I got the email, I was quite shocked and appalled to have to do a painting that wouldn't be chosen by anyone else, but chosen by me, because it's then your statement. And I went to loads of art schools, but only recently graduated, and I found that I had no painting that I'd done before that I wanted in the thing, but I've been doing literal game paintings. So what I've done is I've taken pictures of myself from my past in the order that they represent, not in the order that they were painted, from when I was 14, the portrait of an artist as a young crow, done in steel. And it goes as a declining spiral into the middle from where there's no escape, to see the old fat artist trapped in his studio, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. And I paint very slowly, and my wife, who's here, puts up with me, spending 8 hours a day at it. And it's signed in the middle rather than at the bottom. And it says February, May 1912, because it took about 4 months of hard work to do. And I'm just astounded it's in this room with paintings by some of my friends. And from a picture of me done on a photocopy at the top, which exists. They all exist, strangely, except one, which I couldn't find, so I had to remember it. And 3 months working, 3 minutes talking. Thank you very much.
As part of my teaching duties at the Limerick School of Art, I was for many years involved in organizing trips to visit major European art galleries, museums, studios, workshops. I have come across numerous portrait collections. The National Portrait Gallery in London is maybe the best known one, but I've never seen any self-portrait collection. I think this collection is unique. My contribution to this collection is a lithograph. The word litho means stone in Greek. In Germany, it's still called Steindruck, or stone printing. Today, the technique of printing from stones is only used by artists. Otherwise, it's called offset lithography. The stones are used in my studio or used in the Limerick School of Art and at the Limerick Printmaker Studio. I bought about 30 years ago from the Ordnance and Survey printing works in the Phoenix Park. At that time, printing from stones had just become obsolete. But for nearly 200 years, all Irish maps were printed from these stones. I unfortunately had to take them all down, all the nice hand-drawn images. And some of the stones, 200, 300 kilograms, we had to cut them down to make them more for students manageable. Finally, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to contribute to this collection. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted with all the wonderful stories other people have about their paintings. Unfortunately, I can say very little, but I want to say first of all, thank you very sincerely to this committee and to this marvellous university that are making up this tremendous collection over years and years and years. So the only thing I have to say about my own is it's very old-fashioned. The other thing is that I'm not a portrait painter, I'm a landscape painter, therefore I'm reluctant about portraiture, and I had this painting for 7 or 8 years and didn't like it, and I was eventually persuaded to hang it up, and coming in this morning now and seeing it in the frame, suddenly it seems quite reasonable. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you so much.